May 27th to discuss the draft rules that I shared with the RAC about a week ago. And hopefully we'll have a good discussion regarding what it is we're trying to do and um, why we made the decisions we did with respect to various, proposed alterations to the rules. For this particular meeting, because I just felt like rather than have like a PowerPoint where I kind of have slides directing the discussion, which is normally how I do it. Only have a handful of slides here, and then I'm just going to open up the red line. And I figured there's a lot going on, but it's not like, there's not a zillion rules that are at issue here. We have, as we'll discuss here, we have basically, um, I don't know, eight major kind of rule cluster changes that we're going to dive into, and so I figured we can just sort of dive into it. First, I wanted to sort of discuss what are the main goals here, and then this was sort of in the guide that I shared with the group. But the primary goal here, I think the number one driver is to fill gaps where the current rules kind of identify a compliance responsibility either for the developer or for the department to sort of it either is implied that something is occurring or even sometimes in some cases directly mentions that something, but does not really say enough about the process. And in some cases says nothing about the process. So we're trying to fill those gaps. I think that's probably the number one driver behind this rulemaking. Um, and then these other ones are sort of related to it, clarifying what the department needs from the certificate holders before construction, during construction, after operation begins, creating clearer tools for resolving compliance problems. Because right now the way it sort of is set up is there's an inspection rule, and then there's a rule in Division 29 about going to DEFCON 12. So we sort of wanted to create some stuff in between that to sort of guide the department, and so we're consistent in terms of how we handle issues that may arise and provide a more graceful, hopefully off ramp to facility operators to sort of deal with issues without having, you know, basically giving ourselves more tools to deal with things. Um, and then this fourth one here is improving the site certificate record. We've had various issues with that, keeping that updated and not really having a process for doing that. And then sort of just making everything more predictable in terms of having a clear process for all of the sort of the life cycle of the compliance process. And, you know, hopefully that consistency will improve uh, the engagement, the understanding, and also just sort of reduce the friction and the amount of time and effort it takes to, you know, actually do this stuff related to compliance, both for those who are collecting and submitting information at energy facility operators, and also for those who, at the department who actually have to deal with this. And for those who don't know, we used to have one compliance officer, Dwayne Kilstock, who actually has left the agency last year, but we now have three. So that's literally triple the man/woman hours um, that we used to have. So that's also driving some of the changes that are suggesting here because, if we done this rulemaking previously, we would have sort of been asking staff to do things that we didn't have the resources for, and also asking developers to submit stuff that we wouldn't have the resources to sort of review, which is, obviously a waste of time. So that's sort of some background. Hopefully that helps you sort of understand a little bit more about what we're trying to do. Okay, so we're going to walk through the draft red line, but I just wanted to just bring this up again for those of you who hopefully you've all had a chance to go through the draft rules multiple times and have it all memorized and know everything about it. But for those of you who don't, there's more changes in this, but these are sort of the main ones. We have pre-construction compliant plans in Rule 48, some changes in Rule 50 to inspections and how compliance review occurs. I've we made a whole bunch of changes to 80, and I actually ended up just completely rewriting it. Not every single word, but sort of, yeah, just sort of reorganizing, making it make more sense to me anyway. I'm curious to see what you all think about that. We have a completely brand new rule here in 88, which deals with administrative updates of the facility. Some changes in 105 to correspondence with other agencies. Some stuff in 170 about instant notification, and then a completely brand new rule in Division 29, which is sort of related to this stuff in this Rule 50 with corrective action plans. So there is some overlap here, and it just sort of uh I guess it's sort of up to the department about how they want to proceed, whether they want to do a corrective action plan in under Division 26, or sort of engage in a pre-enforcement notice under Division 29, when depending on the circumstances. So yeah, let me just pull up the uh, draft rules here, and we can start perusing. Yeah, first of all, any questions or thoughts before I actually pull these up?
Not questions or thoughts, but just to let you know, the internet went down where I'm working from.
Okay.
And so I'm on my phone, but I do have my track changes and other things up. So I will be able to participate, but I'm not going on camera. I've got too many other things going. So sorry.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, I also have your track changes. David submitted some today's that we can go over. If I miss something or don't bring something up, feel free to just chime in. Yeah, with
yeah, and I'll also do some
yeah.
commentary on it's not saying the track changes are perfect. It's more as a comment to a potential way of working through one of the comments we have. So anyway,
sure. Okay, so
lead on.
Yeah, all right, thanks, David. So first couple of changes. I mean, always try to cut out rule language where it doesn't seem to be serving a purpose or function. Ironically, we thought, why is there a purpose statement in here? It's sort of self-evident, like what these rules are. You could deign the purpose from the title of the division. So decided that this rule wasn't really helping anybody out. So we're going to propose removing it. And then this bit in here about legislative authority, largely the same. It's basically per all, under ORS, we do these things. Well, it's in ORS. So does it need to be here as well? I don't really think that it does. We already have under each rule the statutory authority and the statutes that are implemented by that rule. So if people are sort of, like, what's the basis for this rule, they can go to these statutes and read them to see if the scope is in line with it. So this is sort of a legacy type thing that used to be done in more rules, but and also had some stuff related to the timing of site certificates. That's 1975. This is not relevant anymore. So any questions about those two suggested deletions? I'm guessing there's not going to be too much controversy on that. Okay, so let's starting here with some more substantive changes in Rule 15 here. As mentioned previously at a previous RAC meeting, one of the things we're trying to do with this and all our rules really, with each rulemaking, is identify language in the rules that sort of directs the council or the department to do things that are not really in their that they have not been directed to do or not within their authority. So like this sentence here, certificate holder shall comply with all applicable lawful rules and requirements of federal agencies. That's sort of an obvious statement that serves no function, like, or else what, like the council's not is not in charge of ensuring that people obey federal, all the requirements of federal agencies. That's what the federal agencies are for. So they have their own enforcement and compliance mechanisms. So there's no point in confusing people with language that doesn't serve a function. So here, this sort of looks like a rainbow. Unfortunately, that's sort of the function. I guess I could have redone it from scratch. It does make it a little bit hard to read, and I may just actually for a few of these rules, just switch it to simple markup. The different colors are actually edits from different members of the staff. If you're curious why this is, blue and why this is pink. So this this compliance rulemaking was these draft rules were sort of a contribution team effort from, I would say, more so than usual, the citing department. Everybody had thoughts and feelings about it. Let's put it that way. So in 48 here, we have just some additional sort of clarification on the pre-construction compliance plan. Some, additional requirements here about phasing that hopefully helps people understand. I mean, I don't think the word phase even appeared previously. And there was questions about whether phasing was, allowed or appropriate or whatever. And we clearly think that it is. So that we wanted to add some language in there to that effect. Lena, can you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm wondering if you could provide an example of an instance that resulted in that subpart B. I'm trying to kind of like understand. It seems like you've probably come across some issue that clarifying language was needed. So I'm wondering if you could provide an example of like when that would apply.
Sure. Sarah, I'm gonna punt, or is that the right word? Punt to you. Um, do you have thoughts on that one? The department requiring a condition to be addressed on a facility-wide basis if phased review would result in duplicative review.
It can, it shouldn't.
Yeah, I think this is more just here as something that we're concerned about, but I don't know that we had a specific example where this ever actually came up. Do you?
Oh, okay, hold on. I mean, I think like a potential example is that, like, say that, the certificate holder is phasing pre-construction. So they're like, of this big solar substation battery transmission line, we're only prepping the small area for the substation. But if the consultant and certificate holder are coming in and saying, so we want this noxious weed plan to be finalized specific to the substation site. Well, if we can see that the landscape of the rest of the footprint is the same, we would say, let's finalize this noxious weed plan for the entirety of the site. That's just like an example. I mean, there could be things where there's no difference in the outcome by how you're phasing it. So we want to make clear we're finalizing this for the whole thing. We're not going to re-trigger it. So I think it will make sense on both ends based on the circumstances, if that makes sense. The idea is that we don't keep trudging along phase by phase and going, oh, we got to refinalize this plan again, forgetting that we just did it and there's no difference and the outcome of
what was sufficient for phase one is going to be sufficient for all the other phases. So there's no reason to review it in isolation.
Right.
Okay. David.
Thank you. I'm going to talk generally about this whole first one and A and B, and that's more, we agree with the concept, but we want to make sure that we're clear on a few things. Phasing to us often I'm speaking for my company, is phasing of the project. So we've permitted 500 megawatts and battery and solar as an example. And so one phase of the project might be 200 megawatts because it was sold to a certain customer with 150 megawatts of solar and 50 megawatts of BESS. The additional piece that we think would be good is I think you've used the word component We might go stage of construction because, for example, we might not even start battery energy storage, the clearing of that site for a year into construction. And so we won't have, for example, final design. We won't have our electrical permits, because electrical permits, as an example, have to be done, even building permits have to be done in a certain period of time prior to actually building that component. And yet, so we just want to make sure that there is that flexibility of not just phasing, but of, if that's what you're meaning by facility component, that's fine. But we just want to make sure that we're really clear. It can be staging of projects, and we're kind of living that right now with one of our projects, and just making sure that all the department and the us that is building are on the same wavelength there.
So, yeah, so like typically you might think of phasing as like, well, phase one, we're gonna do a third of the solar panels, and phase two is the second third, and then phase three is the final third. Whereas staging is like, okay, we're gonna deploy the substation, but it's not operational yet. It's just the first sort of stage of construction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, staging of construction. Probably the best way is the solar and battery energy storage. When you're doing a hybrid system, the battery energy storage often does not take near as long. You don't even sometimes do your clearing for that site, so you might not even have your 1200C for that specific part. You might. It depends on who you're working with and when you're planning on doing that. So just as I don't know if we want to introduce that, but it's the component, stage, and phase. Because for us, phasing is, you're right, we're going to do 200 megawatts now, and in 4 years or 3 years from now, another customer might want the next 200 megawatts, so to speak. So that's the differentiation, and you can possibly see that in some of it.
Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, we are trying to maximize flexibility, and we acknowledge that our terms differ from how the developer's terms work. But I would say, in your example, like the word phase, if the certificate holders would just say, okay, construction's going to take 12 months, and every month it's going to change. Phase one is site mobilization. Phase two is, road building or whatever. I mean, it's up to the certificate holder to define the phase and then identify the conditions that apply to that phase and then comply with them before you start. And we haven't, in the permitting process, we don't say your phase has to be defined by X, and X. It's how you define it. So I think your staging is within the word phase, but we've got to start out with somebody saying I'm going to build it by phase.
What time frame.
Yeah. Right. And then we can apply the conditions based on how you've defined your construction process accordingly.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like phase is a term of art that has a kind of a specific meaning, but from our perspective, it's literally just the first part of your construction operation. So we sort of maybe are merging phasing and staging.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's just very important because there are things like, as I said, for example, particularly your electrical permits that you
Sure.
don't need for matter of fact, you can't even really apply for them until later, because then they come out and inspect and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we'd make sure that that's part of that pre-construction compliance plan. Yeah, that's all I was getting at. So yeah, okay, if we can, we'll have to be very clear on everybody's part, because again, sometimes we speak slightly different lingo, and that has caused
some issues.
grief.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's captured by the word component to suggest that it doesn't have to, like, what you're constructing doesn't have to be a phase. But we'll talk about we'll have some chats maybe offline and to see if we want to beef that up a little bit more. Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Jumping into the rack news, so excuse me if this is a a
No
silly
worries.
question. We just had a question about like the phases in relation to the habitat mitigation planning, and it's like a really great option for large mitigation to walk through it step by step. But there's some projects that are like really small mitigation parcels when it goes by phase. And I guess we had questions about that facility-wide, a department requiring a condition to be addressed on a facility-wide basis. If that would be disclosed like upfront, is that the intention, or how we would walk through timing with phase mitigation? Just had a lot of questions about the implementation of that.
That's a great question for Sarah, and you already unmuted yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that if, if during permitting, now this is a little separate, but if during permitting ODFW wanted to make sure that habitat mitigation wasn't phased, if it was like, well, even if in the first, because site certificates moving forward will have 6 years to start construction and then 3 years to finish. So what we would be saying for the question for habitat mitigation would be, well, does ODO and ODFW, do they want assurance that the full mitigation site will be secured before the full impact? Or are they okay with making sure it's there once the full impact begins? Because phasing in this instance wouldn't allow them to go, well, I'm going to have a half an acre HMA here and then a half an acre HMA over there. It just means if you build the transmission line in the first 2 years and there was only half an acre of impact, or no impacts, but then you have your full 6,000 acres comes in year 3, well, then the HMP obligation doesn't hit until year 3. Now, again, if ODFW were to say, we really don't want any piecemealing, even if the impact is phased, then we can make sure that the phasing isn't allowed within the condition language. So I don't know if that addresses, but this condition allows the mitigation to be phased commensurate with the timing of the impact, but it doesn't allow them to minimize and peel away the overall obligation.
So to see if I can understand what Jordan is asking and what you responded with, she's asking how would this be implemented? And what I heard from you is that it would be in the conditions of the certificate itself would dictate whether or not phasing would be allowed for that particular condition, or not allowed, I should say.
Right. I kind of turned it into like a bigger thing. If the question is about trying to make sure that habitat mitigation isn't phased, even if the impact is phased, then we could deal with that in the condition if this language stays as it is. This language allows phasing, so we would have to reconcile that again, an inconsistency with condition language and rule language.
Well, I think that's the whole point of the sub B, right? Is that even though we allow phasing, we may require condition to. But I think.
But we wouldn't want to leave that type of decision up to discretionary and compliance rules of whether habitat mitigation
would be determined in the site certificate itself.
Right.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Jordan?
Yeah. We were just kind of crosswalking it with the mitigation policy that says, it has to happen prior or concurrent with. And then, just realizing that there's some instances where it doesn't make sense to do that. Just kind of common sense, if it's like a bunch of teeny tiny mitigation obligations spread out over time. But then there are cases where it does make sense with really large mitigation. So I think, we just wanted to bring it up as a topic of discussion.
Do you think it would be helpful to add that limitation in the rule language itself? I'm asking the group, but also Sarah, and something like the department may require a condition as specified in the condition itself, to be addressed on a facility. So,
But it's sort of, or insufficient. I mean, that question to me is a little different than what B is doing. B is just saying, if your small part actually answers the question for the large part, even if you're phasing, everybody acknowledge it's satisfied for both the small and the whole. This question is kind of a different, like, can mitigation, should an overall mitigation obligation be required to be satisfied for the whole? Even
Yeah.
if it's phase. So it's like they're two different
yeah, I see what you're
things.
saying. I see. It's a subtle distinction, but yeah, it's in practice it would be very
Yeah.
could be very significant.
Yeah, and I was trying to fit it into the language, like they're under, would it be considered a duplicative review of the plans? Because they're so similar.
Well, right.
Andy, do you have your hand up? Do you have something to add to this particular topic?
Yeah, I mean, Sarah and I went through this same thing on our facility this last go around, and I mean, what we ended up agreeing with Sarah is that we weren't going to do any of the impacts that were going to have to be mitigated until
Right.
the
Until
habitat
they
mitigation.
happen. Right.
What's that, Sarah?
No, I was just agreeing with you and recalling.
Yeah, till the habitat mitigation plan was approved by not only ODO, but also ODF and W, and that the habitat acreage was acquired. And then no work was done on the habitat mitigation area, because the impacts ended up going on hold. But that's the way that we worked it. And so it would probably be good that there's some language in the rules that has that flexibility, and say a situation like ours where we were only impacting, I think, roughly 6 acres.
Mhm.
And the overall work was much bigger than that, but no other permanent impacts were happening, so that we're not holding up an entire project because there's 6 acres of impacts that aren't actually going to happen
Exactly.
yet. Yeah,
Right.
that type of thing.
Okay. All right.
Mike,
Something. Go ahead, David.
sorry.
Yeah, no,
My
you're fine.
question would be, do we actually need something in this pre-con ruling about that, or is that part of the work that you do when you get your habitat mitigation plan
Right.
put together? That would be my preference, because every habitat mitigation plan has different habitat, different things, and
Right.
and
Well, and
yeah,
I agree with that. I guess I don't think that this type of decision potentially should be one that's determined at pre-construction. Like, if
Okay.
it isn't,
Yeah.
right? If it's
Yeah.
important for the whole to be evaluated, or it's not something where phasing is necessary, it should be obvious. We shouldn't be trying to figure out because that adds a whole other level, I feel, of complexity, of uncertainty of what people might think it means.
I mean, I think ultimately the goal here is to reduce inefficiency. So, like, we don't necessarily want to have something in rules that says you always have to do it this way if you're not always going to need to do it that way. So, but we may want to have some language in here that says that we may have it be done a certain way if it makes sense to do it in that particular case, which is sort of what this B here is doing, but it's with respect to a different issue. But I think that's a similar type of language. Maybe we'll have a C here about requiring mitigation plans to be facility-wide or implemented facility-wide when it makes it more sense to do it that way versus not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think in your sub A, the certificate holder has to identify all the conditions that apply to the phase, as well as any that are related to facility wide, which is a little strange. I guess that wording is weird to me, but that then, I mean, it would be up we start with the certificate holder every time, right? All they have to do is say, this is my phase or my component or whatever. Here are the conditions that apply. They apply to this thing as well as the whole thing. And by satisfying it now, I also satisfy it later because there's no difference. Map that out. I think if that was understood in A, you don't need B.
Okay.
Would it be good to include in that section just specific language about habitat mitigation and permanent impacts identified as part of that process to identify the phase, meaning that each of us certificate holders are required when we do a phased approach and we work that schedule with Sarah's team. It's a separate line item within that schedule. No, we're not going to do any impacts this phase. Yes, we're going to do impacts in this phase, so that it's, I mean, Sarah's team's having us do that already and spell it out, but so that we can identify when that particular condition needs to be met from a habitat mitigation perspective, both the plan and the actual acreage that's required.
Mm.
And I think the question would be to Sarah, would that be sufficient for you guys to be able to document it? And does that work for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think that the problem with just calling out a habitat is it likely applies to a suite of other resources as well. So it's like, to me, it's like a mitigation plan, and it kind of is dependent on the resources, but the mitigation plan may not be triggered or may not be fully triggered at the beginning. So then the question is, do you have to map the whole thing out? If you've phased it in a way where your impacts don't happen until at least year 2 or 3. So either we say all your mitigation has to be implemented, finalized and implemented before as part of pre-construction, or it's allowed to be phased. And where there would be no difference, then you can, anyway, you can just
But
finalize it for the
I don't
facility.
think the habitat rules are drafted that way, Sarah. I think they're drafted, it's either congruent or prior to the end of construction, if I remember correctly.
Right, that you have to actually implement at the time
Yes.
of impact or
Yes.
after the impact has happened. Yeah,
David?
Yeah, but to Sarah's point, that is what we would do as part of A.
yeah,
We'd say it's this 3,000. This part looks like it's going to be permanent impacts. We've said in our habitat mitigation plan or our permitting plan that these are when we're going to get these certain things done. And when the obligation within the site certificate says that we need to, I don't see the need of putting specific wording in about habitat mitigation.
Yeah, I think maybe that was just an example, and certainly ODFW is thinking about that primarily. Jordan, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I personally don't think we need any specific language about habitat mitigation. I was just thinking about how we would implement according to this language. So, and not necessarily saying we need all the mitigation up front as a facility-wide one, but like in the case, that Sarah and I talked about recently, you have like a really small upfront mitigation. Can we actually like decide to punt that to the next phase to group it all together? So instead of before, it maybe just comes with a different phase. So I guess I was wondering the thoughts on if that would fall under duplicative review and if we would have the flexibility to like have some discretion
So
with,
not front loading it, but actually sort of backloading it, if you will.
I mean, if it was
If
like
it
a
made
common
sense.
sense. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. It was just something that I was just checking that we all felt like there was flexibility there to use discretion and do what makes sense.
Um, I think there is, but I also want us to not spend the whole time on Rule 48 here. So
Yeah.
I would say at this point, if you have some more, if you have some ideas about specific language about what this one could look like, either no B here, different language in A, go ahead and make a note to yourself to draft it up and get it to me before the rack comment deadline I'll give you at the end here. But let's move along. So I'm gonna go back to all markup here. So you can see in Rule 50 here, we have just some minor tweaks here about maintaining records of the facility. Has to include inspection reports, and that the department may identify potential violations of certificate conditions, regardless of whether the certificate holder has reported beginning commercial operation under Rule 80. And then there's this bit here at the end. There was nothing on here, but I did have some recent discussions with staff on this particular note about whether we should put some language in here about what actually has to be reported. And I don't know if the word pertinent here takes care of that in terms of, because obviously we don't want to overwhelm the council with they didn't cross this T or dot this I. So what is must report all pertinent findings to the council? Does this require some clarification? Because a whole bunch of things could be a potential violation of a certificate condition that are what my lawyer past self would have called de minimis. So I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts about that. Councilmember Byer, I don't know if you have any strong feelings on that question about what you want reported to you and when.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, pertinent still feels a little squishy, but you're right. We do not want every little thing. I think what we're looking for are trends in compliance or non-compliance. If we hear the same thing over and over, if you have repeated violations of erosion and sediment control, we'd want to know about that.
Should we replace pertinent with significant or some other word?
Mean, these are all those squishy words that what's significant to me
do what
isn't
makes
to you.
sense.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of the bottom line. And in working with your analysts and the compliance team, I think they'll pick up the things that we want to be reported on. As Tom said, we don't want to be overwhelmed by things, but if there's a systemic issue, we want to know about it, if that makes sense. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. Lena, you have a comment?
Yeah, I guess a couple comments on just this section.
Sure.
When I first read this, and obviously it's not even language that changed, but the findings to the council, its next scheduled meeting, I'm just wondering, there might be some cases where that isn't really reasonable time frame. I'm picturing like an inspection happens on a Monday and there's an EFSC meeting on a Friday, and so I just maybe consider if there needs to be some language to make sure that the timing on that could be reasonable depending on the timing of an inspection or a finding. And then I'm curious about the language of identify potential violations of operational conditions, regardless of if commercial operation has started. I'm very curious about that language on how could we be found in violation of an operational condition if we haven't started operations.
Well, I think it has to do with the construction, maybe potentially. So if you have, obviously you can violate construction conditions prior to the beginning of commercial operation, but I don't know, Patrick, you actually, I believe, added this language here. Did you want to answer that question with respect to how you could have operational conditions violated prior to the beginning of commercial operation?
Let me give this some thought. You're kind of, so we're on.
I can help answer too.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. I've got to
go
ahead.
Obviously you could say, well, we're ready to start operation. We haven't done it yet. and we could say, well, you haven't complied with this one thing yet. So you haven't begun operation, but you haven't complied with this operational condition. So that's sort of how I read that. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, we've had an interesting situation or two with like the official transfer of a facility from the construction phase to, the developer's definition of commercial operation, yet they were operating, but so then our like like the construction crews were gone, contractors were gone, but they hadn't said they were in commercial operation yet. So, we want the ability to apply operational conditions to a operating facility, even if certificate holder for their own purposes hasn't designated, and our definition is like, well, if you're generating power and making money from the power generation, then you're operating regardless if you're calling it commercial operation internally, if that makes sense. So we just want to be able to access applicable conditions in those scenarios.
Yeah, I don't think the department is looking to like identify violations that aren't relevant or applicable to
Right.
to a facility. I mean, I don't know that serves any purpose or function. Although obviously there's always a concern that language could be misconstrued or implemented improperly.
Yeah, I guess I'll just to finish that,
Sure.
we'll take a closer look and provide comments, but want to make sure kind of understand how that relates to like test energy and just, testing of, there's times that energy is being produced. It's got to go somewhere, but it's not like an operational facility. So I want to make sure we understand those pre-operational conditions in cases like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'd say if it gives you any solace, the two words here that gives discretion, one, it says we may. So in a circumstance like that, this doesn't say we shall identify something as a violation. It says the department may. So if there is a circumstance where you're really not in operations, you'd explain that to us, and the department would exercise its discretion to not pursue some sort of enforcement action. But what the intention here is what Sarah described, is we don't want to rely exclusively on the certificate holder to say we've begun operation before we can potentially identify violations of operational conditions. If the certificate holder fails to report that they've begun operations, but they have an operational violation, then this allows us to pursue an enforcement action.
Okay. So this next bit here is pretty, I would say, I don't want to say cut and dry, but pretty straightforward. There's just some direction here to those who want to submit what we're now calling a request for a compliance review, because which was previously called a request for inspection, but wouldn't necessarily, a complaint from a member of the public wouldn't necessarily result in an inspection. So we don't, but it might result in a compliance review, right? Depending on what's submitted. So cleaning that language up again, just to be consistent and clear about what people have the ability to actually request, and under what circumstances the department would actually engage in an inspection. Yeah, I would be surprised if anybody here is too concerned about that. However, obviously, if you have any issues or concerns about this language, David.
So just that, in that language, we just suggest that there's one more level of communication from the department to the certificate holder, and you'll see it. It's just a matter of process. If you see it, you don't go straight into an enforcement action. You let us know that you think you've seen something, and therefore, anyway, we put that in just so that and that's just, I wanted to raise that here.
Okay. That's in the red line you submitted to me earlier today.
Yeah, and on
Okay. Okay.
Just
all right. Yeah. Okay. So after a compliance review, I mean, you're saying you want something before this potential corrective action plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
You'll see it in there, and we can talk about it more. But it's just just seems like a little bit more back and forth before it just sort of comes out. But
Mhm.
that would be our, I guess, request. But we can discuss it later, or you can just see what we suggest.
Sure. And if I mean, we may have some questions, like if you guys submit some draft language or something, and it may make sense for us to just meet offline, especially if
Yeah,
it's
that's
something
fine.
that's relatively not too crazy. Okay, well, just keeping us on schedule here, moving us along. So I had this Rule 80, which I sort of rewrote here, which is why it looks like it's all in red line. However, the second half of this rule is largely untouched. What I've done here is taken what we originally sort of drafted and then reorganized it so that it was now very clearly delineated into these sections here. So we have construction compliance reports, final construction compliance facility design report, and then annual reports. So it was sort of all mixed together before, and it wasn't totally clear exactly what we were asking for and when we were asking for it. So that sort of motivated me to restructure this. But so yeah, I don't know if anybody has any questions about what we attempted to do with the suggested changes here, but the idea here is that, you know, facility operators know exactly what they need to submit and when they need to submit it. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. David.
Yeah, no, we agreed with that process. We just wanted to make sure when somebody that hasn't been in Oregon as long, it looked like there could be, you have to continually report on your pre-con compliance that you've already done. If you start looking at the way it's done, I just wanted to make sure that that is not the intent to re-report on things that have already been reported on.
I mean, we definitely don't want duplicate reporting.
We don't want that either. So I guess that's the comment here. Just
Which one,
this would be, let me just double check. This would be, I think, B, and so what is it? 81 and B, construction must provide sufficient documentation and evidence to demonstrate compliance with all site certificate terms. Well, if you've already provided that information before, we're not, in a sense, reissuing the same compliance report that we've already done.
So yeah, this is just during construction, so it's,
yeah, but that's even just during construction. Like if
I mean, my understanding, and Sarah, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that if things haven't changed, your report would say that. It would say as much. You would submit the thing that says 6 months have passed and we're still doing what we did before and we're still complying with the stuff in the same way that we complied with it 6 months ago. Have a nice day.
And that's good, but it says each construction compliance report must provide sufficient documentation and evidence demonstrating that all your site certificate terms are in compliance. So it's not like, we just want to make sure that this, okay, but it uses some of those terms. Anyway, just a statement. And I was, because some people coming new into this, we don't want to be providing.
Sure. So I think sufficient documentation and evidence could be a citation to what you previously submitted, if that's sufficient, right? And the idea is that you're only submitting stuff that's related to, applicable things that are relevant to whatever it is you're doing at that time. So yeah, the last thing we want is for people to submit stuff that's a waste of time. I mean, we literally don't have time for that. So, but identifying potential areas where that duplicativeness exists is definitely the function of one of the functions of this rulemaking. So we'll talk about whether or not we can clean that up a little bit to be more clear about what it is we're asking for. Any other? Yeah, Lena.
Sorry. Going down to the final construction compliance facility design. I don't know if you were going to skip over that, but I think in a previous rack, and I would have to check with our internal if there's any concerns, but some of the geospatial data and all significant components of the energy facility, I'm wondering if there's allowances for submitting stuff under confidentiality Like, I don't know, the public needs access to all detailed geospatial information about facility components and aspects. So I don't know if there's been any discussion in drafting these rules about some concerns about
So, I mean, there is some
public
language
information.
down below related to that. It's not with respect to this particular report, but I mean, I can sort of copy that language if you feel like it would be helpful. But essentially, we just follow Oregon Public Records law. So if somebody's submitting information they feel like is covered by either state or federal sort of confidentiality provision, of which there are many, all we would ask is that folks would say, here's the stuff that you asked for. The stuff in, on which, these pages or whatever that's been marked is confidential under this, ORS, whatever. Yeah. So I am not a public records expert, although I was actually a public records coordinator in my previous position. There's just so many like different potential provisions that would theoretically apply. I didn't have to deal with sort of like industry trade secrets and that sort of thing. Does that answer your question at all in terms of? I know this is a topic that comes up a lot, especially with respect to any time we're asking for more sort of detailed information.
Yeah, that answers.
Okay. I mean, the idea behind this, like this particular thing here in terms of this form and manner of submittal, is that like we only have so much manpower, time, and like there's all of these pressures to be super efficient, and obviously we're charging folks for the time spent on compliance, and it's really like help us help you or help you. So if we can sort of unify how we're asking for stuff, and maybe at some point even provide like example templates and that sort of thing, then hopefully that makes compliance cheaper for folks, but also then that enables us to do the review more efficiently and, saving everybody time and money in the end. I mean, that's the intent behind these provisions here. So to the extent that we're saying, hey, do things differently than used to, I know there's definitely going to be some pushback, but hopefully it will be do things differently than used to, but then keep doing it that way. And we're not going to just arbitrarily change things unless there's meaningful, significant reason to do so. Some sort of change in the technology or how the data is, stored or collected or presented or whatever. Yeah. Any other questions about the Rule 80 here and the various reports that we're asking for?
Yeah, I've got one more on
Sure, go for it.
The compliance report. So under 4C.
Okay.
The department's been moving towards compliance matrices that are provided to the site certificate holders to provide responses. And I'm just trying to understand if is that still the intent of the compliance report? Or is the department moving away from that compliance matrix idea?
I mean, my understanding is that we love the matrix and we want and that we would that would be the expectation here. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to speak to that, but I mean,
I don't know if I would use the word love, but I think that that is the intent of C, to map out how it's currently being done.
Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to put words in your mouth. We appreciate the value of the matrix in terms of efficiently sort of conveying a lot of information with respect to a lot of information. So.
Yes. In that regard, love. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So let's talk about 88 here. This is a brand new rule. It didn't exist previously in any sense. We didn't pull language from other places. This is all new stuff here. And the idea is that this just came up a lot in terms of like wanting to do this, but not having sort of a mechanism to do it, or feeling comfortable about doing this, given the restrictions in the rules as there currently exists. But this is just basically what it says here. It would allow for an administrative update of the facility description, aka not requiring an amendment, and not necessarily. Yeah, the only other question I had about this for the group is we have this bit in here about council approving updates to the site certificate. And I'm curious if, and obviously we're going to be asking the council this too, but if for example, let's say they build, they originally requested to, build 500 megawatts, and then the ultimate decision is that they're going to only build 200, and they know they're not going to build the other 300 before the construction deadline passes, at which point they won't be able to. So might as well update the site certificate to reflect that, to help our compliance team out. And also just anybody else who wants to review the certificate to understand what the facility is. Do we need the council to approve that? I don't know. I feel like, I mean, obviously I'm sort of suggesting that we don't, but we have this language in here that the department will present all site certificate updates to the council for approval. David.
It was one of the things. First is we thought this was a very positive addition.
Yeah.
And it's a slightly different the answer to your question is if it is truly just a change and a tightening up of the description, I don't think it needs to go to the council. I think it would be presented as a staff report or something like that, where it's, I forget the fancy term, but it would be part of the overall, you would let the council know that they've done this and they're now tightened it up. And I guess my only question to all of that would be, if you didn't change ownership, but would this actually help? Could you do an administrative split of, if you were eventually going to, but you didn't change ownership, but you were going to do the next 200 megawatts or whatever, using your example, could you split it as an administrative split and just inform that still same owner? We understand the same owner, same company, same owner. Anyway, that was a question I wanted to pose.
So you're saying you would get approved for 500, but that you would want to sell the right to 200 to someone else?
No. What it would be is, okay, so you've built 200 and you're updating your project description, but part of that is that you want to retain the residual 200 under the same ownership, same everything.
My understanding is that
but you need to split
construction deadline hasn't passed, then and you update the site certificate, then you would lose the ability that there, like if you were sort of wanted the option to build more, that you shouldn't update the site certificate.
Okay, so that's what the question is. It would actually, from our perspective, make more sense because that way it would tighten up for your own compliance. It's like this compliance under this ownership. We built the 200 megawatts. You've updated that. And by the way, you just simply same owner and everything. And I get it. If you change owner or you sell it or whatever, then you would have to do an amendment. But if it was actually under the same company and everything. Anyway, that's a question, posing a question to the team that you can ponder at a later time.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had another comment, but in response to your comments, David, that if the scenario is you're not asking for a deadline extension, I think generally the permitting team would be in high favor of making amendments that are solely to split, like very administrative versus process. Because there's not much there, but generally the splits are coming with a new certificate holder and a deadline extension. So if you were, and we have an amendment process scope that's different for a deadline extension so that you're kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And then, I guess that's all I had to say.
Okay, Councilmember Byer?
Yeah, so I think we have pretty good guidance about what needs an amendment and what doesn't, and we've done the rulemaking to clean up that process. If something is not going to be built, just notification that that's happening, I think is important for us. We've seen multiple things that have required amendments where new LLCs have been created. We haven't seen one like in David's situation where part isn't built now for whatever reason. But I think that if there's no possibility of more impacts, no change to financial assurances, if it really is kind of a downsizing or a pulling back, just notification. I think there's generally flexibility for the council to weigh in and say, staff, please reevaluate this, but I don't have any concerns with the language you've drafted, so thanks.
Okay, Sarah, did you remember what you were going to mention?
I did, and then I had a few other questions. So,
Sure.
and of course, I think we like this idea from the perspective of long-term operations and having an easy ability to understand what the facility is compared to what was permitted. But in terms of like process and cost, I mean, is this something certificate holder, they submit their explanation and red line site certificate to us and we are just available to review and process at a low cost, and at what time frame? Like what, you know what I mean? Have we looked at, well, this is $1,000 in 30 days, or it's, we just, you know, I don't quite, because evaluating what conditions could be removed based on, or even mitigation obligations that could go away based on final design. If, I mean, hopefully that would be clear, but it could take some work to make sure it's done right. I'm just curious, you know, without it, does this say what they have to submit to us and how much it costs and the time?
I mean, it says that,
Okay, we can just do it without them. Oh.
well, yeah, you can, I mean, either, we can just do it after the expiration of the construction deadline. That's the only time we just,
I would think that the certificate holder needs to trigger it. I mean, I can't envision a space where we're sitting around waiting to do this.
yeah, no, before expiration of the construction deadline, this is then, 1B. A, it says the department may revise or remove a site specific condition under subsection B only at the request of the
Only
certificate
at the
holder.
request. Okay.
So only
So
the
it's
certificate holder would trigger
optional.
this, yes, if
Okay.
they wanted
Ugh.
to. But then once the expiration of the construction deadline occurs, then we can say, well, obviously you can't build this thing that the site certificate previously said you could, because the construction deadline passed, you didn't ask for an extension. Therefore, we in this particular case are going to unilaterally just edit this to say 300 megawatts instead of 500 megawatts.
No way. I don't like that.
You don't like it?
No. The certificate holder needs to be the one that does all the work, gives it to us. We have a timeline and a cost. Otherwise,
So you want to get rid of B,
well,
and just keep A?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if you'll be able to just keep aid the way it is, but it'll have to be like, because one deals with before expiration of a construction deadline, and then one is like once the expiration deadline. So
Oh, why would we have a before?
Well, they don't
think
have
it's
to.
if-
It just says this is a restriction. It says we can't edit anything, even if we wanted to, unless the certificate holder asks us to.
Like somehow if they knew they weren't going to build it
Yeah.
out and they
They're
just
like,
said,
we're never
"Let's
going to
go
build this
ahead
other
and
thing.
update
We don't
it."
need to wait till the construction deadline. Could you remove this so that the site certificate reflects this, then we can, then it's clear we only need to deal with these conditions, and these other conditions won't apply because we're not going to build that. They may be motivated to have the site certificate be updated just from a compliance standpoint. But we would only change that at their request. That's what this A is saying. And then B is that we would only ever touch it ourselves if after the construction of the deadline, you didn't build something.
Right. I just think that's a little dangerous.
Okay, well, something to think about.
So Sarah's what you want to see is like this, still the certificate holder has to come and say, hey, our construction deadline has passed and we have not built these things. Like, this is what needs to be updated. That's what you want to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, I mean, this is a unique scenario. I just, because we kind of are faced with it, thought I'd throw it out there. And I'm curious, Lena, if you have any feedback, but so it is possible that we have an amendment in process. No, that doesn't make sense. But we have an amendment in process to add solar whilst the deadline for previously approved solar has passed. But this is optional for the certificate holder, so it doesn't matter, I guess. But I guess the question would be, is there any need to like grandfather out applicability if you've got an amendment in process while your deadline passes? But maybe that's overly unique. No need to line rule language to it.
Andy?
I'm going to go back just a couple of sections. I just thought of something that's a problem, and it's the transition from construction to operations. Some of us have got facilities that part of the amendment would be replacement of operational equipment that needs to go into operation prior to the end of construction. And we would expect that the operation conditions would apply to that equipment and that facility. And how would we document that with Sarah's team so that they understand, one, so that we're not out of compliance with these regulations, but then also that there's because of a phased approach project, how are we documenting that with Sarah's team so they understand what's in operations and what's still in construction?
I mean,
and it may not even be an issue, but I'm just thinking that it could be.
I guess I don't know if I turn that over to Sarah, but my understanding of this is that you only, I mean, you're responsible for notifying us like what you're building and what conditions apply to what you're building. So I would just say that you would reflect that in the report, that you would just detail that in the report that you send us.
Okay.
I mean, does that answer your question?
Sort of. I mean, a perfect example is the mist storage field. We're replacing turbines. We replaced one last fall, and it's in operation now, and replacing the second one now, and it's still in construction. The old turbine, which is out, wasn't part of like the CO2 standard, but the one that's being replaced right now has been pulled out. I mean, there's those transition periods that I'm talking about that will be in operations because we have a duty to serve our customers, but the whole site certificates for the whole storage field, and we've got other work planned as part of our current amendment that we're working through, and just making sure that we're in compliance with these rules, but that everybody understands what's in play for construction and what's in play for operations. And if we just need to do that with our semi-annual reports, that's fine. I just want to make sure if there's some language that needs to be added to this to define that, or if there's already something that's there that we can do that with, that's great too.
Well, this wouldn't apply to your existing facility. This compliance rulemaking is going to apply to future site certificates, right? But
okay, so this doesn't apply to an amendment process. This is only for.
Yeah, this is for, new
facilities only?
No, what I mean to say is applies to, well, no, I guess it would, I mean, if an amendment produces a new site certificate, then this would apply, right, Patrick? Even if the original site certificate was based on the old compliance rules?
Yes, and you might want to clarify it in the rules itself. For example, anytime we want something to apply retroactively, we can do that, but it's best to state it directly in the rules so it's clear.
Jared, do you understand what I'm saying? I don't think Tom does. Sorry, Tom.
It's entirely possible that I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've mapped out seems reasonable. What I'm trying to figure out is if the rules some way limit you from rolling. I mean, you should be able to roll things out of construction compliance into operational compliance in a phased way. I don't think the intent of these, what we're looking at here on the screen or what we've talked about so far, is intended to make that challenging.
Yeah, I want to make sure that, and I want to make sure all of us don't get in trouble with everybody else that's paying attention too.
Right. Yeah.
On top of it, so that the council understands that I'm replacing turbines in a phased approach over multiple years. As those turbines get constructed and put into place, they're also rolled into operations because I have to have those.
Mhm.
But I'm still under construction. But parts
Right.
of what I've got in my amendment are in operations, and making
Right.
sure that there's language written within these rules that indicate that those situations happen and how we need to document them to ensure compliance.
Yeah. And we are, yeah, kind of seeing more and more unique situations like that. Like, I mean, a repower is kind of a good, like, example for wind, where we have a blend sometimes of construction and operation, or we pause on operation, or in your situation, Andy, there's like a bridge. Operation
Yeah.
applies to some things, construct. So it's kind of complicated, but you should be able to split reporting if you want, to focus. Like you do your semi-annual on that's under construction. You could still be in pre-construction for a different phase, as well as you have your other bucket of operations. And you can manage, I mean, you could blend it all together or keep them separate.
Right. But having that flexibility within the rules,
totally.
I think, is
Right. And
important.
having the process acknowledge that not everything is in this perfect bucket. There's lots of blending.
Yes. Did you understand it, Tom? I didn't mean to say that you didn't understand it, but it sounded, I wanted to make sure it was clear.
Yeah, I know. I mean, Sarah deals with this on a sort of implementation ground level a lot better than, or more than I do. So I absolutely am not do not claim to understand the intricacies of all of this, which is why I'm just coordinating it, right? So this doesn't bother me at all. Okay. So let's talk about that. We only have a couple more here, and which is good because we only have a few more minutes. I tend not to like super duper long rack meetings because I feel like people just, you can only pay attention for so long at a decent level. So this 105 here, this is the one that had this sort of public records language that we added because there was some questions about it that we gotten previously, but essentially we're asking for, we'll submit correspondence to folks that we're submitting to other agencies that's related to their compliance, and then we ask them to do the same thing to us, and then just, if to the extent that the stuff you're submitting, you feel like is applicable, falls under Oregon Public Records Law, then you have to identify what it is you want us to withhold and under what basis. So, okay.
Seems onerous, just and I get the Oregon law, but I mean, correspondence with federal agencies that really, quite frankly, don't come under the jurisdiction of a site certificate, like this. I don't know. It seems
so it's only to the extent that council relied on it, needs to rely on that to determine compliance.
To determine, Okay.
You don't like it.
Anyway, we have no, we don't like that one. But anyway,
Okay.
we'll maybe at another time. It's just, it seems like an overreach of something that, what does it mean to rely upon it? When we're dealing directly, we deal with those other agencies that you talked about at the very beginning about compliance, and that's in a sense the business and making sure that they have their own compliance rulings. Anyway, that became sticky in our parts here, just to let you know.
So basically, you're saying, look, we comply with this because we comply with this other thing, and therefore we complying with this federal requirement means that we comply with this thing. So you're like, okay, great. Well, how do we know that you're actually complying with it, right? Like, whatever federal agency you're submitting this to may think your evidence is good enough, but that doesn't mean we think your evidence is good enough. So if you're relying on some other transmission to prove compliance with something that you have agreed with council that you're going to comply with, then we need to see that thing that you submitted to that other agency, right?
We submitted and got a permit or whatever. Like, I don't know. We went down many rabbit holes on this. I'm just telling you right now. And so we can discuss it offline, but
I mean,
this
the
seems
alternative
like
would
an
be to say that
overreach.
you can't cite evidence. You cannot cite evidence of compliance with other
Yeah, but
agencies or
yeah, we can, because if we can show you a permit, but correspondence with them, like you know, you're getting into correspondence reports, all these other things. If we say yes, we're going to comply with take
it's fair.
whatever, then if we get the actual permit, if it's a permit or an approval to do what we said we're going to do, that should be sufficient. Anyway, that's what, upon our review, that's our
All right. Well,
thoughts.
hopefully we either can figure out how to tweak that, or if we don't, we provide a better explanation of why we're asking for whatever it is that we're asking for. But that's something we'll think about. Okay, so so on notification of incidents here, we just tweaked this a little bit to include some stuff that's come up in recent years, like adding the word spill, because we've had some like oil spills with some wind turbines. And it wasn't clear that that was actually a violation or could potentially be an incident. So we want to make it clear that that's the case, as well as a mechanical failure. And yeah, so this isn't too crazy. We're just adding that. And then also adding this bit here about that something maybe isn't necessarily significant unless it's like a pattern, right? So maybe the individual isolated event isn't problematic, but maybe a pattern of incidents can constitute an issue. So sort of making that clear here as well. Yeah. Okay. I think that's it for 26. I'm just going to scroll through here just to double check. There's just some citation corrections here. And then just matching this 72-hour period to what the other Rule 26 stuff has, or Division 26 rather, with regard to incidents. Lena, is that your hand popped up?
This might be, this came up during, I think, the last council meeting, of this idea of changing the 72 hours and replacing it with as soon as reasonably possible.
So to do
And
the
there was
opposite of
some-
what we did.
So there was some back and forth about if people liked that or not. And so I'm curious to know.
I'll say internally we have people with different feelings about whether or not it should say as soon as reasonably possible, or whether it should have a time. And we have folks on both sides of this. So sure, I'll turn it to the group. Obviously, when you say as soon as reasonably possible, that doesn't necessarily, not everybody's going to agree on that. So, but then obviously if you say 72 hours, that's not always going to make sense in the given circumstances. And then if you say, we had people who proposed 72 hours or or as soon as reasonably possible. But then it's like, might as well just say as soon as reasonably possible at that point. So kind of went in circles on this.
I mean, I would say from my perspective, I appreciate having a defined hours in there. As soon as, like, probably what people don't like about as soon as reasonably possible is, would we get in a situation where Odo would say, well, reasonably possible would have been within 5 hours.
You should have told us within 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Or, well, it wasn't, we didn't really know about the situation for 2 weeks. So, like, the approach PG takes is like, we'll provide notification within 72 hours, and it might be like very basic information because it's going to take a while to get down to things, but we appreciate having a defined timeline in there.
Hidden within this tweak here is, it previously said as soon as reasonably possible notify the department, and it now says within 72 hours after discovering the condition or circumstances. So it's a sort of narrow defined time period, but it's also tied to the discovery. It's not like, within 72 hours of the incident occurring, even if you didn't know about it. Therefore, when you found out about it, you were either already late or you only have 5 minutes or whatever. Yeah. So we're trying to be reasonable, but it's like there's definitely more than one way to go about this. That's not crazy. And I would say at this point, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but if you have thoughts, if you want to think about, if I'm just throwing this out to the rack, if you want to think about this particular issue, both to the 72-hour reference here in Division 29 and also in Division 26, you'll see there's another reference to 72 hours. If you do have feelings about that, definitely type that up and send it to me, and we will continue to noodle on this before we go to council about with what we want to do here. I personally don't have super strong feelings on this one, so your thoughts and feelings will have a lot of weight on how we approach this. Okay, finally, as we sort of draw to a close here, we added this pre-enforcement notice provision to Division 29, again, to just allow the compliance team more tools to do stuff that isn't, well, there's an incident or a potential violation, and the only thing that the rules tell me to do now at this point is to issue a notice of violation, which has also, all these repercussions and everything. This enables us to approach things in a more, reasonable approach if the circumstances dictate it, right? Like if seems like it's not that significant, or sort of it's in the middle ground, given that maybe there's a repeat of minor incidents sort of add up to something that's more significant. Still don't necessarily want to go straight to notice of violation. This allows the department to do that with reserving the right to not do this, right? So if we feel like it's significant enough, even just the first go around, the first discovery, we could still do what we are unable to do now, which is go straight to a notice of violation. But in all the other circumstances, we now have this process. So I don't know if anybody has any thumbs up from David, any thoughts or feelings about this particular rule that we've added. But this is some pretty standard. We actually copied this from the nuclear stuff down below. So this language here is not, with a few minor tweaks, has previously existed in the rules. So we did not come up with this. We're just applying it now to all citing division violations, not just nuclear.
Yeah, my only comments was just making sure we start to work together on what is reasonable detail. That's always, again, it's that kind of language. That was just a comment.
Yeah.
Overall, we're pleased with the thing, but like, what's that reasonable, detail? Because it's obviously different if it's a nuclear waste or, or whatever. So,
and I would say in this particular instance, in my take on this is like, what would you expect the person reviewing this to need to know or to want to know in order to determine whether how we should appropriately respond to this, right? So we don't want to be in a situation where people are hiding the ball. That's going to lend us to be obviously more towards the aggressive side, and being more transparent about like, here's what happened. Here's how we discovered it here. We did these things. We notified you here. Sort of like the more collaborative the process is, then the less, that's going to lend itself more towards this teamwork approach.
We agree. It's just that it's always that case as we learn.
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, as much as we all love doing this, nobody wants more detail than they needed, right? So, yeah. Okay. So as we sort of draw to a close here, there's definitely, as you can see, several sort of outstanding issues or topics that we're going to continue to ponder. Just to give you a sense of the timeline here, it is May 27th today. If we're going to get this in front of council in June, which is, we don't have to, but that is sort of my goal at this point, we submit a staff report to the council on June 12th, which is 2 weeks from Friday. So I would say the sooner you can get me feedback on these rules and our discussion that we had today, the better. If you want to be sure that, I can guarantee you that if you get it by June 8th, which is a week from Monday, and about, what is that, 12 days from now, if you can get me your feedback by then, I will absolutely include it in feedback that is presented to council. If you miss that deadline, that's fine. If the council approves the draft language and we open it up to the public comment period, you can submit your comments at that time. So it's not the end of the world if you don't get back to us in the next 10 days. It's just, if you want this to be in front of the public and be what the public comments on, obviously, if you provide comments or suggestions during the public comment period, they're much less likely for other folks to be able to see and comment on those. So it's sort of up to you. I didn't notice if there was any members of the public in this call, but I wanted to make sure. JT, I don't know who you are, so go ahead and unmute yourself if you had any thoughts or comments before we close.
Yes, my name is Jonathan Tallman, and I sent in an email public comment, and I didn't get any response back on it. And I have been affected, everything that you guys just talked about, especially even the 80, the scenic background, as well as, the number 88 I've been affected by. And your changes that you guys want to make, I understand why you want to make them, but at the same time, when you do not have a voluntary easement across the property still, it really bungles up the situation as far as what you're trying to do and what your hands are tying the landowners and their property rights. And that really needs to be articulated, communicated, and property rights do not need to be taken, especially because, let's be frank, why this is all happening and the changes are happening is because of data centers. And it really has to be shown, because what it does is it devalues property and it makes these trillion-dollar companies billions, but the subjects get their property devalued and taken from them for pennies on the dollar when you take them and you strap their hands as far as communication. That's the big one, as well as the legalese of it, because they have the lawyers to battle it and fight it and drag it on forever. And it just devalues the property immensely, and it really makes you not want to be a citizen of Oregon anymore after issues like this. And I can speak firsthand of what we're talking about. But those questions that I sent you, I really would like comments, because it is very important that those things get answered, articulated, communicated, and documented. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments. So I did not I see any comments submitted from you. So I don't know where you submitted them to, but if you could submit them again to my email address, which is on the screen here, tom.jackman@energy.oregon.gov. I'll be happy to take a look at them. We don't have a public comment period on this rulemaking yet, but we're assuming that the council approves them in June, then they would likely run from probably essentially July through the end of August. So you can submit comments during that time, and any comments submitted during the public comment period are considered by council for this rulemaking.
Okay, so hold on, wait, Tom, I guess I'm kind of confused because number one, this is a public comment period, and I was told that we could do public comments, and this is the confusion that I had because I've also emailed on other things where it's open, but it's not open, but then you have to come back and do it and just do it at this comment period, and then that's closed, and then there's an amendment to redo something, so then that period is closed. It just adds to bureaucracy and makes it very frustrating as a landowner, especially when it affects my property and its property value. I hope I'm communicating that clearly.
Yeah, I understand your frustration, but I mean, essentially, we do various things and we review various projects, and each of those projects has its own public comment period. This is for a rulemaking related to our compliance rules, and the way the sort of public comment period works is set up in statute. Like I did not create this system, so we have one public comment period for each rulemaking, and that public comment period it is starts with a formal process where we file a notice of proposed rulemaking. So we currently are in sort of informal rulemaking process right now, and have not even started the formal sort of statutorily guided rulemaking procedure. But we try to be as clear as we can. Go ahead.
How does that make sense? I guess that just doesn't make sense to me what you just said right there.
So
it doesn't at all. I'm sorry.
Because
it's a public comment period.
There is a public comment period for various actions that we take. The public comment period for this rulemaking has not yet started.
So then what is the public comment period for?
The public comment period is a statutorily directed period that begins after approval from our governing body, which is the council, who directs and the creation of the rules that govern the citing process.
I'm still confused, Tom, and I'm sorry. I don't mean to be, conflicting, but that doesn't make sense to me. The whole point of a comment period is a ping pong back discussion, okay, as how to solve problems, and especially when I bring it up in a public comment section, questions that I have, especially documented, and then you tell me that you haven't gotten them. It really destroys faith in the process, is what I'm really trying to articulate.
I mean, I don't know where you submitted the comments, but my position is I deal with the rules, so I don't necessarily deal with individual projects. So if you have comments with respect to individual projects, those projects have their own comment periods, and they have folks who manage those and deal with the comments for those particular projects.
Well, the email I got, and I responded back to Sarah, and with all the questions and the information that I had, and that to me, it needs to be articulated because I've been dealing with this for the last 7-8 years, and all I've got is crisscrosses as far as communication, and all my that's happened to my property is devalued while it's made trillion-dollar companies billions of dollars, and the bureaucracy is just beyond frustrating dealing with it. It makes me have no faith in my property rights or my government after stuff like this happens.
Yeah, I can totally understand your frustration there. I am not Sarah, so I don't know. I mean, if you sent them to her, and she, I'm sure, reviewed them and did whatever she felt was appropriate to do with them. But I mean, we all have our own sort of roles and responsibilities. I do not represent everybody who works for the Oregon state government. All right. Well,
but I'll tell you, Tom, I've had the same thing happen with Pacific Corp with another deal. I've had the same thing happen 7 years. I mean, I can show you about 7 different times this exact same thing, and everybody crisscross and says, "Hey, this has nothing to do with me. There's nothing that you can do," and that's just so frustrating to deal with something like that. That all it does is devalue your property.
Yeah, you keep mentioning that it devalues your property, and I understand that, but this is a rulemaking. It's not in relation to a specific project, right? So if you have comments about that, we'll be opening that up next month.
It's the process of the rulemaking that is devaluing my process. my property, yes. Because just like I said, everything that you guys just said right there is a layered on top of it, devaluing my property to make me hire lawyers in a case to fight for my property rights when it's taking away my property rights. And by taking away my property rights, you're devaluing my property. That's what it's doing. And that's what I'm trying to articulate.
Okay, I totally get what you're saying, but I'm the rules coordinator for the Oregon Department of Energy for the Siting
And these
Council.
rules are devaluing my property. That's what they're doing.
Great, but I'm like in charge of updating and editing. They're not my rules, okay? So I get your frustrations, but this is not the forum. So if you have any other thoughts or concerns with respect to this rulemaking, pay attention to our notices that we send out, and we will keep you informed about when the opportunity to comment on this particular rulemaking is. Okay, thank you. All right, so sorry about that, everybody. Appreciate everybody's
I still
participation
haven't got
today.
people to listen to me. That's my issue.
Thank you for your participation, and keep an eye out for the communications. I'll let the RAC know when things are due, but as I said, you have about 12 days to get back to me with respect to this rulemaking. So thanks, everybody, and I will be hearing from you, hopefully.